Good morning, Asia. Good evening, America. You're watching World DNA with me, Diksha Bisla.
And I'm Samiksha Srivastava. Coming up on the show today, President Donald Trump says that US and Israel have won the Iran war, but that United States will stay in the fight to finish the job. In fact, Trump has also said that the US forces have knocked out 58 Iranian mine-laying vessels so far, and this amid reports of Iran laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. We'll get you the detailed statement on the show today.
And also coming up on the show, 2 foreign tankers carrying Iraqi fuel were subjected to attacks inside territorial waters, causing them to catch fire. Now, Iraq evacuated the 25 crew members from the 2 vessels, and the fire is still ablaze on both ships. We'll get you all the details on that and much more on the show today. But first, a quick check on the headlines.
Israel strikes 10 Hezbollah targets in South Beirut, including Intel headquarters and command centers, after Hezbollah and Iran claim strikes on Israel. Lebanon's health ministry says 7 killed in central Beirut.
Saudi Arabia intercepts a drone heading towards Sheba oil field as Iran targets the facility again in its campaign to disrupt oil energy markets. The country intercepted several drones targeting the facility on Wednesday.
We don't want to leave early, do we? We got to finish the job, right?
Donald Trump claims US has won the war in Iran, saying Tehran did not expect the scale of offensive. Speaking at an event in Kentucky, says Iran is virtually destroyed, but promised to finish the job.
Israel reports Iranian missiles heading towards the country, prompting air defenses to activate and alerts for civilians to take shelter. Now, explosions were heard in Jerusalem. Israel announces wide-scale strikes on Tehran.
Iranian state media reports an Iranian precision-guided drone hit a building in Dubai, while Dubai authorities say that they are responding to a drone incident near a Dubai Creek harbor.
An attack on 2 oil tankers near Iraq killed 1 crew member, with 38 people rescued and others still missing. Iraqi government says the tankers were sabotaged, but no group has been identified as responsible.
North Korea releases image of leader Kim Jong-un's teenage daughter, Kim Yu-ai, firing a pistol this week after photos showed her shooting a rifle, once again stoking speculation that she is being groomed as heir.
U.S. Energy Department says it will release 172 million barrels of oil from its strategic petroleum reserves starting next week, and this in order to address price disruptions from the war in West Asia. It will take about 120 days to deliver.
US is launching new trade investigations into dozens of countries over excess industrial capacity and forced labor, opening the door to tariffs. Trump seeks to divide his trade agenda after Supreme Court struck down his global duties.
not allow a terrorist regime to hold the world hostage and attempt to stop the globe's oil supply. And if Iran does anything to do that, they'll get hit at a much, much harder level.
This is a war imposed on us. And what we are doing is only defending ourselves. So I don't think, talking with Americans anymore would be, on our agenda anymore.
As the war in West Asia intensifies further, US President Donald Trump has declared victory, saying that Tehran is on the brink of defeat.
However, he warned that it does not mean US is going to end the war immediately. Trump even said United States will remain engaged in the Iran conflict to finish the job and cited major military gains, which included the destruction of dozens of Iranian naval vessels.
Now, this comes hours after Trump suggested that the war could soon be over because Washington had run out of targets in Iran. Speaking to reporters in Washington, Trump warned that it will be almost impossible to rebuild the country should US choose to escalate strikes and hit sections of Tehran. Listen to this.
We don't want to leave early, do we? We got to finish the job, right? Over the past 11 days, our military has virtually destroyed Iran. Tough country. Their air force is gone, totally gone. That took the better part of about 3 hours.
Further, the US president said that US is going to look very strongly at the Straits. In fact, earlier in the week, Trump had hinted at the possibility of taking over the strategic Strait of Hormuz, a key global oil choke point carrying a fifth of the world's oil.
Well, we're going to be in very good shape. You see what's happening. They are pretty much at the end of the line. Doesn't mean we're going to end it immediately, but they've got no Navy, they've got no Air Force, they've got no anti-air traffic anything. They have no systems of control. We're just riding free range over that country. And now we're going to look very strongly at the Straits. The Straits are in great shape.
Meanwhile, as oil prices are continually disrupted, the United States Department of Energy said it will release 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve beginning next week. Now, the release would take approximately 120 days to deliver based on the planned discharge rates.
The agency also accused Iran of manipulating and threatening the energy security of America and its allies. Iran, too, on its part, issued a series of warnings, and that is by threatening to wage a prolonged war with the US and Israel that would destroy the world economy.
The statement comes as fighting near the Strait of Hormuz rattled energy markets and prompted emergency reserve releases. Now, oil prices have surged since February 28th, when US and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran, killing its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and plunging the West Asia region into conflict. And to unpack it further, joining us live from Washington, D.C. is Peter Kuznick. He's a professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Thank you so much, Professor Kuznick, for joining us in the broadcast. Now, from saying there's nothing left to hit in Iran, President Trump says that U.S. is not finished with Iran just yet. And this while the Israeli side has repeatedly said that the war will continue without any time limit till all its objectives are achieved. Now, these objectives, which still remain shrouded in fog, whether the fog is strategic or perhaps a miscalculation, we're not sure. Now, is there any off-ramp in sight, having said that?
There's not really any off-ramp in sight. Trump is always capable of declaring victory and saying the war is over, but the Iranians aren't going to go along with that. The Iranians are intent upon inflicting maximum damage on the U.S. and its allies, and they're doing that through asymmetric warfare. They don't have the firepower, obviously, that the United States and Israel have, but what they do have is the ability to pretty much shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which is really having a devastating impact on the US economy and the global economy. The world depends on that oil. We use the figure that 20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, but you have to realize that half of the world's oil is actually consumed in countries themselves. So, in terms of the amount of world oil that's traded, it's closer to 50% that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So, this is having a very, very severe impact all over the world right now.
Kuznik, that's exactly the point I was coming to next. Important to mention here about the IEA member countries as well, who have decided to carry out largest ever oil stock release amid market disruptions. That is 400 million barrels of oil. Do you think that will somewhere offset the supply chain disruption we are seeing at this stage?
It will have some impact, certainly. But we saw today that the price of crude oil dropped to $90 a barrel, then went up again toward $100 a barrel after this was announced. So it's not going to have an immediate impact. It's not going to be some kind of magic elixir that's going to cure the problems. And it's a serious problem for Trump, which is why he wants this to end. This war in the United States is very, very unpopular. Trump's approval ratings are in the toilet even before the war. And there's so much discontent. Officially, they were saying today that 3 out of every 5 Americans are very badly affected by the increase in energy prices on top of the inflation that's consistent going on. And the jobs report that just came out for the month of February was terrible. The United States lost 92,000 jobs last month rather than increasing the number of jobs. So this is not a good situation for Trump. He can do as much happy talk and tell as many lies as he wants, but this is a very serious situation. And the other members of his party are very concerned that they're going to get slaughtered in the November elections. And then there's the MAGA people. You've got, for example, Tucker Carlson, his big MAGA supporter, said that this war is absolutely disgusting and evil. Marjorie Taylor Greene said that the members of the Trump regime are sick effing liars. You hear this from Eric Prince. You hear this from Joe Rogan. So the MAGA bros, at least many of them, are very, very upset about this because they're old enough to know that the U.S. has been lied into one war after another during our lifetimes. One war after another. Vietnam was a pack of lies. Iraq, a pack of lies. Afghanistan, a pack of lies. Libya, what we did in Syria. So the American people's willingness to tolerate this is very, very brief right now. And Donald Trump is feeling that pressure, no matter how much he says how great things are going.
We hear you, Professor Kuznik. Now, we understand that the scrutiny is still very much there, within his own base and the opposition. And the IEA releasing, this, a third of its stock, it is a significant development. But at the same time, the IEA can't frequently, keep releasing this kind of stock to assess the situation that we're in right now. And we're nearing the 2-week mark in the conflict with Iran. And of course, the oil prices are rising. There's growing discontent. How long do you think, President Trump can sustain this, given that the pressure he's receiving from within his own base, and also continue in a similar capacity? Or do we see perhaps the capacity in some ways being, reduced going further?
Trump seems to be indifferent to public opinion. He seems to be indifferent to his own Republican officials in his own party. We know that the Iranian drones that are being shot off in great numbers, they've got over 100,000 of them left, cost them between $25,000 and $30,000 a drone. The interceptors that the U.S. and Israel are using to shoot them down cost upward of $1 million. If you do the math, the U.S. can't sustain this very, very long. There's a finite number of interceptors. The U.S. is not producing them quickly, while Iran is producing close to 10,000 missiles every month. So between the missiles and the drones, compared to the interceptors, Iran can sustain this for quite a long time, while the U.S. and world economy gets worse and the U.S. depletes its stocks. So The United States can go on as long as it wants. The U.S. has a powerful military and a vast economy, whereas Iran's economy is certainly weakened already by sanctions and now further weakened, and they don't have the allies to sustain it. But the Iranian people have a fervor right now, and they're rallying around the flag. And I think that the morale, despite all the destruction, is still quite high in Iran. So there doesn't seem to be any appetite for surrender. Trump's calling for unconditional surrender. Well, we saw how well that worked in World War II, when Truman called for unconditional surrender, and the Japanese refused to do so until the Soviets invaded August 8th. But it required boots on the ground before that was going to happen.
Mr. Kuznik, I'd like to go back the earlier point that we were discussing, that is on Strait of Hormuz. Of course, that is the epicenter of the war now. Do you think it is possible at this point for U.S. Navy to provide security to these tankers that pass through the key strategic route?
When I look at what the Houthis were able to do in the Red Sea, and I look at Iran's capability compared to the Houthis' capability, and the Strait of Hormuz is even narrower, Iran can shut down the Strait of Hormuz. They can do it with their sea mines. They can do it with attack boats. They can do it with the drones and the missiles. So I think that the U.S. can try to send ships through there, but those ships could be sunk, and nobody wants to see that. The U.S. Navy doesn't want to be put in that position, and the insurance people do not want to insure boats and tankers that are going to get sunk in the strait. So I think that is Iran's ace in the hole, really. That this is in the asymmetric warfare that's going on. That's the card that they have to play, and they will play it. They seem to be quite willing to.
Right, Professor Kuznik, you highlighted the asymmetry and, of course, the attack and the defense here. Of course, even though United States has, mightier firepower, Iran has created this asymmetric endurance model where it has essentially become a race for time in this war. But having said that, of course, you've mentioned that there is no off-ramp visible in the short term. But if you look at the longer term, do you think perhaps Iran will have to come back to the negotiating table or come back to US and sit down and figure out what's the way forward? Because we understand even this time and also during the previous war, Iran was essentially in the middle of negotiations, while when US decided to attack. What's the possibility of that, actually leading to a solution here?
The Iranian leaders don't have enough trust in the United States to want to sit down with them. They were negotiating in good faith back in June, and then Israel and the United States decided to bomb them in the middle of the negotiations. And then these negotiations were going very well. At least the foreign minister of Oman, who was mediating, said they'd made significant progress and they were getting close to a solution. And I think that's why Israel and the United States attacked, because they didn't want a diplomatic solution. What worries me, and I've got an article right now on Al Jazeera, which says, talking about Trump breaking the nuclear taboo. Trump has already broken every tradition, every norm, every taboo, every international law, and the U.S. laws. The one thing he and no one else has broken since 1945 is the nuclear taboo. That would make Trump the king of the jungle like he wants to be, the dictator to the world, the person who's willing to do what nobody else is willing to do. I put that together with the Iranian threat, where they said earlier this week that if it looks like the U.S. and Israel are forcing regime change and they feel they're in an existential situation, they are going to save their most potent missiles and drones and attack Dimona, which is the nuclear facility in Israel. That would effectively end Israel, but it would also end much of that region, become uninhabitable, with devastating health and environmental consequences. Nobody's been willing to do that. But if they're desperate enough, that's what they're threatening. And so the Times of Israel has written about this, but nobody in the United States has even mentioned the Iranian threats. So I see potential for even more horrific and catastrophic things happening in this war, which is why we do have to end it diplomatically as quickly as possible. And the other thing I see is we know what happened in Gaza, the genocide and the flattening, the destruction of Gaza. I see that beginning to happen in parts of Beirut, in parts of Tehran. So clearly the U.S. and Israel can bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. But even that, we saw that happen in the 8-year war between Iraq and Iran,
Right.
where they refused to surrender, even after that was happening there.
Mr. Kuznik, just last point before we let you go, talking about the humanitarian aspect of this war, specifically with respect to what's been happening in Lebanon. More than 800,000 people have been displaced. In fact, with the latest strikes of Israel that have been carried out, 8 people have lost their lives. Do you think direct talks of Israel and Lebanon is possible at this stage?
I think we need international mediation. I'd like to see Putin play that role. I'd like to see Modi play that role. Xi Jinping, Lula, whoever can do that, the Foreign Minister of Oman again, whoever can play that mediating role between countries that don't trust each other and don't think that the paper that's signed is even worth its weight in the ink. But the world is desperate. And this is more, it's beyond the question of U.S. and Israel and Iran. I mean, this represents a threat to potentially, if it unravels further, to the world and to world peace. So I think we have to force that negotiation and let other people do the mediating, even though the sides do not trust each other. And the Iranians would like never to have to sit down again with the U.S. negotiators who talk to them, and then when they've got them lulled into a state of quiescence, bomb them. This is just horrific right now, and I hope this war ends, because the killing.
Professor Kuznik, and it is a developing situation. We'll have to wait and see where it goes from here and how both sides recalibrate their next moves. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us, Professor Kuznik.
Thank you for having me.
We have some breaking news coming in from Israel. The Israeli military is reporting a new barrage of missiles from Iran, and the latest barrage follows an early wave of strikes.
In fact, statement also coming in from the Israeli military, which says that the IDF identified missiles that were launched from Iran towards Israel. Defensive systems are operating to intercept the threat.
Now, the Israeli military has urged people in the affected areas to head to shelters. The new missile salvo comes as Israel has launched wide-scale strikes on Tehran and Beirut. Now, remember earlier, Iranian media reported that Iran's Revolutionary Guards carried out a joint missile operation with Iran's Lebanese ally, Hezbollah. Now, this is the latest we're getting in from Israel for our viewers who are just joining us. The Israeli military is reporting a new barrage of missiles heading from Iran, and the latest barrage follows an early wave of strikes.
That's right, Diksha. In fact, as we speak, sirens are blaring. Day 13 of the war in West Asia, and with that, the Iranian forces firing more missiles at Israel. The IDF intercepting these missiles that are being fired by the IRGC.
Right, and the IDF has identified missile launch from Iran towards Israel. The defensive systems are operating to intercept the threat, and the Israeli military has urged people in the affected areas to head to safe shelters. And the new missile salvo comes as Israel has launched wide-scale strikes on Tehran and Beirut. Earlier, the Iranian media also reported that Iran's Revolutionary Guards carried out a joint missile operation with Tehran's Lebanese ally, Hezbollah.
And parallelly, Hezbollah camps are being targeted by the Israeli forces. So on multiple fronts, missiles and drones being fired. As we speak, sirens blaring in Israel, which are being the missiles that are now being intercepted by the Israeli forces.
And with that, it's time for us to slip into a very short break on World DNA. But don't go anywhere. Coming up on the other side, Iran held a funeral procession of fallen commanders, where thousands gathered to pay their respects to senior IRGC commanders. All this and more coming up on the other side of World DNA. Stay tuned. You're watching Beyond World as well.
in-depth coverage of global issues broken down into facts, figures, and simple words. Backed with analysis from field experts who truly matter, because we believe in decoding the real picture for you. So you get a much wider and deeper understanding of stories from around the world, a 360-degree analysis. An award-winning documentary series, week after week creating the maximum impact. Watch WION Wide Angle at these times on WION. World is One. Global policymakers, global military leaders, global strategists, 7 pulsating themes. One global stage. India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is One.
Campaigns, elections, alliances, controversies, and power play. Beyond the noise and rhetoric, no election, no ballot issue too small. Stories that analyze global and domestic politics. More than just headlines. A dedicated show with varied perspectives, expert take, citizens' voices, detailed ground reports, and in-depth coverage from political corridors of the world. This is Race to Power. Only on WION. World is One.
Welcome back. You're watching World DNA with Diksha and myself, Samiksha Srivastava. Let's begin with the headlines.
Israel says new barrage of missiles have been launched from Iran towards its territory, following earlier strikes on Tehran and Beirut, with its defensive systems actively intercepting them.
Israel strikes 10 Hezbollah targets in South Beirut, including Intel headquarters and command centers, after Hezbollah and Iran claim strikes on Israel. Lebanon's health ministry says 7 killed in central Beirut.
Saudi Arabia intercepts a drone heading towards Sheba oil fields as Iran targets the facility again in its campaign to disrupt global energy markets. The country intercepted several drones targeting the facility on Wednesday.
We don't want to leave early, do we? We got to finish the job, right?
Donald Trump claims US has won the war in Iran, saying Tehran did not expect this scale of offensive. Speaking at an event in Kentucky, says Iran is virtually destroyed, but promises to finish the job.
Iranian state media reports an Iranian precision-guided drone hit some building in Dubai, while Dubai authorities say they are responding to a drone incident near Dubai Creek Harbour.
An attack on 2 oil tankers near Iraq killed 1 crew member, with 38 people rescued and others still missing. Iraqi government says the tankers were sabotaged, but no group has been identified as responsible.
North Korea releases image of leader Kim Jong-un's teenage daughter, Kim Joo-wei, firing a pistol. Weeks after photos showed her shooting a rifle, once again stoking speculations that she is being groomed as the heir.
US gasoline prices have climbed above $3.5 a gallon, highest level since 2024. The rise comes as the escalating war with Iran disrupts oil supply and tightens global markets. Drivers are feeling the squeeze at the pump, adding political pressure on the administration.
US is launching new trade investigations into dozens of countries over excess industrial capacity and forced labor, opening the door to tariffs that Trump seeks to revive his trade agenda after Supreme Court struck down his global duties.
I will not allow a terrorist regime to hold the world hostage and attempt to stop the globe's oil supply. And if Iran does anything to do that, they'll get hit at a much, much harder level.
This is a war imposed on us. And what we are doing is only defending ourselves. So I don't think, talking with Americans anymore would be, on our agenda anymore.
Well, our top focus remains US-Israel war on Iran and, of course, the broader West Asia conflict. President Trump says that Iran is running out of time.
But Tehran is warning of a long war here, a war that would destroy the world economy. A week of war has cost the US more than $11.3 billion, while ships, tankers and oil fields are already under fire. Both sides have intensified their attacks. Now, let's take a look at the latest developments.
President Donald Trump says that Iran is facing imminent defeat, but added that it does not mean US is going to end it immediately. This is while he was speaking to reporters that Trump even said the straits are in great shape, apparently referring to the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has largely shut down the strait to global, which has resulted in global disruptions.
Now, Iran has warned that it could wage a prolonged war with the United States and Israel that would destroy the world economy. Iran said it targeted commercial vessels after they entered the Strait of Hormuz, ignoring the warnings of its navy. Now, Iran's Revolutionary Guards, they had warned that they would strike the economic centers and banks which are linked to US and Israeli interests.
An attack on 2 oil tankers near Iraq killed at least 1 crew member as Iran carries out a campaign to disrupt global energy markets. Iraqi authorities even said that 38 people were rescued while the search continues for the missing. They did not specify the crew members' nationalities or provide details on who was behind the attack.
Meanwhile, silos are on fire in Oman's Salalah port as a British maritime security firm said that oil storage facilities were struck on Wednesday. Oman TV reported that drones struck fuel tanks in the port. No damage to merchant vessels had been reported.
Saudi Arabia intercepted a drone heading towards the Sheba oil field this morning, which is the second day when Saudi Arabia has intercepted several drones that targeted the facility, which is crucial to the country's oil production. In fact, Iranian state media even reported that an Iranian drone struck a building in Dubai. State broadcaster said that a precision-guided drone had hit a tower in Dubai.
Lebanon said an Israeli attack along the seafront in central Beirut killed at least 7 people. The Israeli military claimed it has destroyed 10 Hezbollah command posts in Beirut's Dahieh and dozens of rocket launchers across Lebanon during a 30-minute span.
Hezbollah has said that it launched missiles at an Israeli military intel base near Tel Aviv early on Thursday. Earlier, the Israeli military had said that Hezbollah launched around 100 rockets at northern Israel, which marked the largest Hezbollah attack since the hostilities escalated earlier this month. Iran's Revolutionary Guard said that they had carried out a joint missile operation with Hezbollah against targets in Israel.
Now, amid the escalating tensions, the UN Security Council has passed a resolution calling on Iran to immediately halt attacks on Gulf states. The Council said that such attacks breach international law and pose a serious threat to international peace and security. It demands the immediate cessation of attacks against Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Jordan. Well, we have some more details emerging on the attacks on the 2 oil tankers near Iraq. At least 1 crew member was killed in the attack, and images show a ship at sea with plumes of smoke rising from a huge fire.
That's right. It was unclear whether it was a drone attack or explosive-laden boats. Authorities told state television that 1 crew member has been killed and 38 rescued, while search continues for the missing.
Now, it did not specify the crew members' nationalities or provide details on who was behind the attack, which occurred roughly 50 kilometers from the coast, and the Iraqi government's media cell told national news agency INA that 2 tankers were subject to sabotage.
Iraq's oil ministry even said that it had deep concerns about incidents involving oil tankers in the Gulf without providing details. An oil tanker was attacked as it was preparing to enter the port of Khor al-Zubair, where it would have taken on board an additional 30,000 tons of liquid naphtha.
While the second targeted vessel, which was Safe Sea Vishnu, was sailing under the Marshall Islands flag and was chartered by an Iraqi company. The incidents come just hours after the US Embassy in Baghdad warned that Iran and Tehran-backed Iraqi armed troops might target US-owned oil facilities in Iraq. Well, for our viewers who are just joining us, this is the latest we're getting. Now we have more details emerging on the attack on the 2 oil tankers near Iraq, where at least 1 crew member was killed in the attack.
That's right, Diksha. So once again, a quick recap of the details known so far. This is the latest that is coming in, one person has been killed in attack on oil tankers, while 38 others have been rescued. And as we speak, the search is still on for those who are reportedly missing.
Right, and images show a ship at sea with plumes of smoke rising from a huge fire. Well, it was unclear whether it was a drone attack or an explosive-laden boat. Authorities have told the state television that the one crew member which has been killed and 38 others have been rescued while the search continues for the missing people. Now, he did not specify the crew members' nationalities or provide details on who was behind these attacks, which occurred roughly 50 kilometers from the coast.
And important to also mention here the statements that have been coming in from President Trump, who says that US is looking strongly at the Straits. He's also said that US was going to look very strongly at the Straits and the war. This while the war continues for the 13th day.
Inside, come on. All members here? Yes, yes, yes. Come inside. اصعد اصعد. خليه يرتاح خليه يرتاح يا ولد. جيب لنا حاجه
All right, we shift focus then. When US President Donald Trump was weighing his options for Iran, his administration was confident that waging a war would only have a short-term impact on global energy supply.
Right, and Trump's energy secretary, Chris Wright, even pointed out the last year's 12-day war in June, saying that oil prices blipped up and then eventually came down.
Even White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has given assurance, and that the Operation Epic Fury will ultimately lead to a drop in oil and gas prices, especially for the Americans.
Once the national security objectives of Operation Epic Fury are fully achieved, Americans will see oil and gas prices drop rapidly, potentially even lower than they were prior to the start of the operation.
Now, however, what was not anticipated is the extent of Iran's retaliation on US bases in Gulf and also the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the world's most critical waterways, which is responsible for at least 20% of the global oil supply.
Well, Trump says that US has dismantled mines in the Hormuz Strait, which posed a massive threat to shipping route. However, when he was questioned for his end goal when it came to the waterways, he did not have a clear answer.
About the strait, you mean? Yeah, well, I want to keep it open. I want to keep it good. You know, it doesn't pertain to us so much as it does to China. We're really helping China here and other countries because they get a lot of their energy from the straits. But, hey, look, we have a good relationship with China. It's my honor to do it.
The extent of Iranian strikes are shaking the supply chain. Since the war began, the price of Brent crude, the international standard, it jumped by 15% to about $84 per barrel in the first week of March. This was the highest level which was observed since July 2024. Now the war is in its second week, and now the prices have spiked even further to $100 per barrel. The surge is already creating panic among Asian markets. G7 nations are ready to tap into their oil reserves. The impact is deep, so much so that US is fine with the 30-day window for India to purchase Russian oil.
And with this, Democrats are accusing Trump administration for not having a backup plan. After Trump said that he wants the Strait of Hormuz to remain open, Democrat Senator Christopher Murphy said that the administration had no plan for the Strait of Hormuz and did not know how to get it safely back open.
While US was hoping for change in Iran's leadership after the assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Trump himself expressed disappointment after Khamenei was replaced by his son Mujtaba Khamenei. But the appointment dims prospects for Trump, who wanted a say in Iran's leadership.
Hours after Iran said that it has now shifted its military strategy from being retaliatory to continuous strikes across the region, President Donald Trump, in an interview to Axios, said that the war is coming to an end very soon and even cited that there is nothing left to target in Iran. Notably, US ally Israel says that Iran campaign will continue without any time limit.
And Israel is carrying out fresh attacks on Iranian capital.
But as sounds of blasts continue across Iran, the country is now mourning killings of senior military commanders.
Now, slogans, flags and anger, these are the visuals from Tehran, where people are coming out in large numbers to attend the funeral processions of the fallen commanders. Thousands gather to pay their respects to senior IRGC and military personnel which were killed in the ongoing aerial bombardment by Israel and the United States.
The crowd also had large number of women participation in a show of unity and resistance. Crowd raised anti-American slogans while pledging loyalty to Islamic Republic government by waving Iranian flags.
Now, remember Iran's foreign supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was assassinated during the first wave of attacks which were carried out by Israeli and American forces. Along with Khamenei, IRGC's commander-in-chief, Mohammad Pakpour, chief of central staff, Abdul Rahim Mousavi and minister of defense were also killed.
Well, more than a week after an Iranian warship was sunk near Sri Lankan waters, the country has decided to hand over the bodies of the sailors killed in the attack.
Right, and this comes even as the United States has urged Colombo not to repatriate the Iranian crew and the survivors. Well, a court in the southern port city of Gaul has ordered that the bodies of 84 sailors be handed over to the embassy of Iran. Local media reports say that the order was issued after a request from Gaul Harbour Police, and the bodies are currently kept at the morgue of the National Hospital in Gaul.
Also, according to reports, Sri Lanka's foreign ministry says that it is in touch with the Iranian embassy in Colombo regarding the situation. In fact, at the same time, Washington is pressing Colombo not to send back the Iranian crew members and survivors from the attack.
Now, the sinking of the Iris Dana was described by U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth as a quiet death. It marked the first torpedo strike by the United States on a naval vessel since World War II, and the vessel was hit by a torpedo attack while sailing near Sri Lankan waters, killing 84 sailors on board.
On the other hand, Sri Lanka has also taken in crew members from a second Iranian vessel, the Iris Bushehr. The ship experienced engine problems while sailing within Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone, which is about 9 nautical miles from the coast. Also, authorities say that the vessel will eventually be moved to the eastern port as well.
Of course, and in the interim, Sri Lanka has reportedly granted 30-day entry visa to 208 crew members from the Iris Bushehr. Many of them are being moved to a Navy camp near Colombo while the ship is relocated. Sri Lankan President Anurakumara Dissanayake has said that Sri Lanka has a humanitarian responsibility to assist the sailors.
As for Sri Lanka, the situation remains sensitive. Both Washington and Tehran are important trade partners. United States accounts for about 40% of Sri Lanka's apparel exports. Iran is also a major buyer of Sri Lankan tea.
Meanwhile, another Iranian warship, the Iris Lavan, with the 183 crew members on board, is currently docked in the Indian port city of Kochi. Sri Lankan authorities say that they are continuing to manage the situation while coordinating with all sides involved. And the United States is opening a new front in its global trade battles.
Well, the Trump administration has announced new investigations into what it calls unfair trade practices by dozens of countries, a move that could eventually pave the way for new tariffs.
Well, Washington says that the goal is to protect American jobs and ensure fair trade, but the move risks escalating tensions with key trading partners worldwide. The United States Trade Representative's Office has launched 2 separate investigations under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. It's the same legal authority which was previously used by the Trump administration to impose tariffs on Chinese imports during his first term.
The first investigation focuses on excess industrial capacity, essentially looking at whether countries are producing far more manufactured goods than global demand, potentially flooding international markets with cheaper products.
Now, according to U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, the probe will examine economies including the European Union, China, Japan, India, Singapore, Switzerland, South Korea, Vietnam, Taiwan and Mexico.
Officials say that the investigation will focus on countries where there is evidence of structural overproduction across various manufacturing sectors. If the United States concludes that these practices are harming American industries, the investigation could very much lead to new tariffs or other trade penalties. In fact, the second investigation is expected to begin shortly that will focus on imports linked to forced labor. Greer says that the probe could affect around 60 U.S. trading partners, examining whether countries have laws that prohibit the import of goods produced using forced labor. Investigations also come at a critical moment in U.S. trade policy.
Now, just weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down President Trump's global tariffs, ruling that he exceeds his authority by using emergency economic powers to impose duties on imports from nearly all countries. In response, the administration quickly imposed a temporary 10% tariff on imports, which will remain in place until July 24th, while officials work on more permanent trade measures.
Despite the court setback, the administration says its broader strategy remains unchanged, which is protecting domestic industries and reducing what it sees as unfair competition. Some tariffs, including sector-specific duties on steel, aluminum and even automobiles, remain unaffected by the court ruling and are still in place.
And the timing here is notable. The investigations are unfolding just weeks before an expected meeting between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing in April, where trade tensions are likely to be high on the agenda.
Meanwhile, new data from the U.S. Treasury shows that the federal government recorded a $308 billion budget deficit in the month of February, which remains roughly unchanged from the same month last year. Government receipts total about $313 billion, while federal spending reached $621 billion, both among the highest monthly figures on record.
Well, tariff revenues, which is a key part of the Trump administration's trade strategy, brought in about $26.6 billion in February. Officials say the figures do not yet reflect the impact of the Supreme Court's ruling striking down many of the tariffs, because duties are typically collected weeks after goods enter the United States for the first 5 months of the current fiscal year. The U.S. government has run a deficit of about $1.004 trillion, although that is around 12% lower than the same period last year, largely due to stronger revenue collections.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on World DNA. Our news and updates to continue. You're watching WION. World is One. Stay tuned.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide, because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
Global policymakers. Global military leaders. Global strategists. 7 pulsating themes. One global stage.
Problem with NATO is that
In an ever
ever-changing, fast-paced world, identifying the pulse of global happenings is important. Because it is the pulse that truly measures the real nature of world events. It monitors the shifting geopolitical landscapes and anticipates what lies ahead. At WION